Thank you. Good evening, everyone. 1 minute looks like. Yeah, 1 minute. Let me just check. Yes, okay. Good evening, everyone. So we were discussing in a previous session on registration, right? So we understood closely the concept of registration, what happens when you should apply for a registration, what are the limits. Mostly we understood the threshold limits, and we clearly understood that if you have multiple branches, right, when you should apply for a registration, it is always when you make a taxable supply from that location. Yeah. So and then what happens in case of special category states? Even that we understood very clearly, saying that you will go for a special registration and your limit will get reduced in such a location, but the limit for that place you will have to take only if you make a taxable supply. So the concept of taxable supply is very important, that if you're doing any taxable supply from a location, then in that location you will register only if you make a taxable supply, not otherwise. Okay, so aggregate turnover has to be considered, but a taxable supply from that location also has to be looked into. So that is what we understood in registration. Then we understood on cancellation of registration, revocation of registration, and suspension of registration. So very clearly we understood those concepts. So what happens next? As we had started saying that registration is a first step in the compliance, right? Now, abhi compliance ko aage badhana hai. We have to move ahead with compliances. So the next part is generally the returns. But before returns, the documents, what is required for the returns is very relevant. What is that? Those are the tax invoices, because we know that tax invoice has to be issued, but what are the formats for issuing a tax invoice? What other procedures are there for the tax invoice? Apart from tax invoice, what are the other documents that we will discuss in today's session? The amendments of the previous chapter, yes, amendments also we have a separate session on updates. So in that we will discuss, but wherever we are discussing the topics and wherever there is a requirement of in terms of requirements of any updates. So I'm mentioning over there itself, so you don't have to worry. Any kind of updates which is very much relevant, we will discuss in the statutory update session as well. So one question which has come in respect of my previous session is on cancellation of registration. If a person avails ITC in violation of provisions of section 16. Yeah, let me just tell that. Okay, so cancellation, there are various reasons. Cancellation by a registered person on his own or by the department can happen because of various reasons. One of them is when you're discontinuing your business, when you're transferring fully to any other persons in case of death of a proprietor, in case of amalgamation, in case of demerger, and in case of change in constitution. One of the other reasons why yeah, another reason for cancellation is where you're availing input tax credit in violation of provisions of Section 16. Section 16 has given some conditions. Now you have to abide by those conditions and claim the input tax credit. But if you have not abided by those conditions, then also your registration can get cancelled. Those are the two instances. One is when you violate the provisions of 86B. What is 86B? It says that you cannot, if you are having a turnover more than 50 lakhs, then you cannot claim 100% of your credit. You cannot pay all your taxes from your credit. You can pay only 99%, and 1% you have to pay from your cash ledger. But you have violated that provision, then your registration will get cancelled. That is first condition. Second is when you furnish details of your outward supplies. So when you discuss returns, you'll get to know that there are multiple returns. To briefly understand that, when you make any sales, okay, you have to report all your sales through one return form, which is called as GSTR1. Now, all your outward sales you will report in GSTR1, and the total value you will report in GSTR3B. So GSTR1 is your outward supply return, and GSTR3B is your monthly GST return. So if you report more value in GSTR1 than what is there in your outward supplies in your summary in GSTR3B, because in 3B you will pay the tax, in 1 you only declare the outward supplies. So if you declare more supplies than the amount what you're paying tax on, then that is a violation, right? You're giving more credit to your customers and you're paying less tax. So that's a violation. And second will be if you are claiming more input tax credit than what is available in another return called GSTR2B. So if you're claiming more credit in your GSTR3B returns than what is appearing in GSTR2B, that is also a violation. So in these two cases of violation, you will be liable for cancellation of registration. Okay. And please explain explain the circular part relating to non-applicability of upper threshold limit of 40 lakhs. Hemlata, can you please explain your query clearly? Are you talking about notification number 10 of 2019, which exempts any person who is engaged in exclusive supply of goods and whose aggregate turnover does not cross 40 lakhs from registration requirement? Is your query? Gunjan, जो थियोरिटिकल एस्पेक्ट्स है वो कॉन्सेप्ट सीखने के लिए अभी पढ़ाए जाएंगे. वंस आप कॉन्सेप्ट सीख लोगे तो फिर आप प्रैक्टिस खुद कर सकते हो. और वैसे हमारे पास 3 सेशन रहेंगे प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग सेशंस के. उसमें हम प्रॉब्लम्स भी डिस्कस करेंगे और उसको केसेस सॉल्व करते वो भी डिस्कस करेंगे. सो उसके लिए एक डेडिकेटेड सेशन है, क्योंकि एक बार कॉन्सेप्ट क्लियर हो जाए फिर एक कंसोलिडेटेड प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग सेशन लिया जाएगा. Okay, notification number 10 of 2019, Hemlata, what it says is that generally 10 lakhs and 20 lakhs is the limit, but this notification 10 of 2019 was passed, which says that any person who will be exempted from registration when he is making exclusive supply of goods. Matlab, he is making only supply of goods, no services at all. Okay, only supply of goods, then his threshold limit will be 40 lakhs. Okay. Exempts notification number 10 of 2019 exempts any person who is engaged exclusively in exclusive supply of goods. Then his aggregate turnover, if it does not cross 40 lakhs, then he will be exempted from registration. If it cross 40 lakhs, then he will have to apply for registration. There are exceptions to this. Of course, one is a person who is liable for compulsory registration. For him, this will not apply. Then the other part is persons who are engaged in making of supplies of special goods, which we saw, ice cream. I'll take you to that slide. Yeah, the threshold limit notification number 10 of 2017. Here the limit is 40 lakhs for in exclusive supply of goods. The following persons cannot opt for this benefit. One is persons who are covered under compulsory registration. Then persons who are dealing in ice cream, pan masala, tobacco and tobacco substitute products. Then people who are dealing with fly ash, bricks of fossil meal, building bricks, earthen or roofing tiles. And people who have already opted for voluntary registration, they also cannot get this benefit because they are already registered. Then persons who are engaged in intra-state supply in 10 states, which means that people who are registered in those specific states, for them, this 40 lakhs will not apply. For them, respective 10 lakhs and 20 lakhs will apply. That is what is this saying. Another point, what this notification is saying is that even if the person is engaged in supply of services, right? What services? Not all services, only one service is excluded, which is giving of amount and getting interest against it. So if you receive any interest, that will not be considered as a deterrent. That will not stop you from getting the limit of 40 lakh rupees. So if you're doing supply of exclusive supply of goods, right? And you are getting interest also, still you can apply for this threshold of 40 lakh rupees, because that is the only one exclusion which is given in the section. Okay. So since there are no more questions related to previous chapter, let's continue with our present topic for today, which is tax invoice, credit note, and debit notes. Okay. Invoices, we'll discuss what is an invoice. Invoice is a commercial instrument which is issued by a supplier to a recipient. So we're not talking about the definition of tax invoice, because GST uses the term tax invoice and it has some conditions. But before that, let us understand the normal meaning of the word invoice as such. When somebody says invoice, what we understand from that, it's a commercial instrument which is issued by the supplier to a recipient. Okay. It is not that I don't buy anything and I'll still get an invoice. No, it is an instrument for a sale which is issued by a supplier to a recipient in normal course. In GST law, what is the relevance? The GST law under section 31 mandates issue of a tax invoice or a bill of supply. Okay. The general nomenclature is a invoice. When I make some sale, I have to raise an invoice. But in GST law, you'll see that tax invoice is issued by the supplier, generally under 31. But in case of reverse charge, the receiver also has to raise an invoice. That is what is a different and unique nature of tax invoice under GST. In case where you make a taxable supply, then you have to raise a tax invoice. In some instances, you have to raise a bill of supply. When is a case when you raise a invoice on which the recipient cannot claim the credit? When is that situation? There is a concept which we learned called as composition supply. So if you're a composite dealer, then you can sell something at a lower rate and you cannot collect the tax from the customer. Since you cannot collect taxes from your customer, you cannot issue a tax invoice. You have to issue a bill of supply. Okay. So section 31 mandates the provision that when you make any supply of goods, you have to issue a tax invoice and bill of supply. So if the law mandates somebody, it means the person who's registered only on that it can mandate. So if a person who's not registered under GST, what will he do? So if a person is outside GST and you have so many provisions of the law, वो तो बोलेगा मुझे कुछ applicable ही नहीं है because मैं GST में registered ही नहीं हूँ. Correct? So a person as long he is unregistered, उसके लिए provisions applicable नहीं है. Right? So it means if there's a small trader who's having value of sales for the whole year of 15 lakh rupees, तो उसके लिए GST registration law ही applicable नहीं है, registration is not applicable, then all of these provisions will not apply to him. So he will not issue an invoice, right? He will make a sale, he will give you an invoice, but that will not be a tax invoice as per GST. And on that, he will not charge GST. So if any person in your practical experience, you see that if a dealer from whom you're buying anything, he is not mentioning his GST number, then you can question him, then why are you charging me GST? If you're charging me GST, please mention your GST number on the invoice. Otherwise, how do I know that I'm paying you the taxes and whether you are paying it to the government or no, right? In the name of tax, there should not be any robbery. So you can ask the person to provide the GST number. The other relevance of invoices, if a supplier gives an invoice, then the recipient can claim the credit on the basis of that invoice. In your ITC chapter, you would have understood under section 16, the conditions for claiming credit. One of the condition is you should be holding a valid tax invoice. So that's why it is an essential document to avail input tax credit. And the best aspect is there is no specified format which is discussed or given saying that this format itself you have to use. So the law does not say that there's a fixed format which you have to use. It gives you the content saying that you use any format, doesn't matter. But these are the contents are the essential ingredients which has to be present. If those ingredients are present, then this is good enough. Okay. Nilesh, this is a new chapter in the new scheme. This was already there in the old scheme as well, and it is continuing in the new scheme also. Is invoice compulsory? Yes, when you make a sale, invoice is compulsory because of the reasons what you have stated. Is GST number, if GST number is incorrect, if GST number is incorrect, the provision of the law says that you have to raise an invoice. Now, at the time of invoice, you got a wrong GST number. So you cannot correct the invoice, right? Because invoice is already raised. So when you upload the details of the customer's GST number, you would have also given the credit to a wrong GSTI number, right? So for that, you could do a correction online saying that when you file next month's return, you could do a amendment of the invoice and correct. Okay, so that provision is available. Bhumi, your question is in Smart, S-Smart, when we get bill, in that they apply GST null. There is not GST number. So it means they're not registered, because if they say null, it's possible two things. One is on your respective product, what you purchased, there is no GST. And second could be that they are not registered. So you could check with them. Roshni, November 2024 exams, classes have not yet been announced. So once it gets announced, you could see on the BOS portal and on the app. Okay. Now, by what time we should issue the invoice? We have discussed this under time and value of supply, where we have a specific chapter. Let's take a gist of that so that we understand when should the invoice be issued. So there is a separate time limit कि मैंने आज सेल कर दिया है, मुझे आज सेल इनवॉइस रेज करना है, right? I will raise an invoice today. That is okay for goods, but for services, how will you decide it? That's why there is a time limit for issue of time within which your invoices should be issued. So there is a time limit separately for supply of goods, and there is a time limit for supply of services. What is the time limit for supply of goods? Where the supply involves movement, it is separate. Where the supply does not involve movement, it is separate. For a transaction of supply which involves movement of goods, you have to issue a tax invoice before removal of the goods. And in a case where it is other than movement, then the delivery of the goods or making the goods available, before that you have to raise the invoice, right? We understood in detail, so we'll not get into that much of detail, but understand that we recapitulate the concepts that when we read the time when you should raise an invoice, where the supply involves movement of goods at the time of removal of goods. In case of other than movement, at the time of delivery of the goods or making the goods available. Before that, you have to raise an invoice. In case of supply of services, okay, supply of services within 30 days from the date of supply of service, right? And in case of insurance and banking company, within 45 days, right? This we understood. But if there is an insurance, banking company or NBFC or telecom operator who are making any taxable supplies between distinct persons, which means within one banking company is part of this. Within one banking company, if there is any transfer between one branch to another branch of any services, then the time limit is recording in the supplier's books. If they are recorded in the books, even if they have not raised the invoice, the time of supply will be recording in the supplier's books itself. If there is no entry in the books, but some service has been provided, before the expiry of the quarter, they have to do it. So it's a special case for a insurance, banking company, non-banking financial corporation, and a telecom operator, where they are doing any supplies between the distinct person, which means within one PAN across different states or within the state to different registered entities. The time limit is recording in the supplier's book or before the expiry of the quarter. Mayur, good question. Can someone make Kacha bill and collect GST then? What do you mean by Kacha bill? So you're basically saying that it is not a GST registered person. So if he's not a GST registered person, then he will make a Kacha bill, but he cannot collect GST then. जो पावर है, जो ऑथराइजेशन है, वो उसी को मिलेगा जिसके पास रजिस्ट्रेशन है. रजिस्ट्रेशन आपको मिला है, तब you can collect the GST, otherwise you cannot. We are consumer and seller. We are customer and the seller collects GST from us and not filing returns on time. So what can we do? Can we take any legal action? Yes, you could take a legal action, but you should be very careful that you are for sure knowing the fact that supplier is not paying the taxes. Okay, I will again show you a screen like how we had done last time to understand whether, because you will have the GST number of the supplier, right? From his supplier's GST IN, you can check whether his returns are filed or no. At least if returns are filed, then at least you know that he is filing the returns. Now, whether he's filing correct returns or wrong returns, that you will not get to know because everything is not displayed. His GST returns will not be displayed to you. तो आपको थोड़ा ध्यान रखना चाहिए कि whether वो टैक्स रिटर्न्स ही फाइल नहीं कर रहा है. Just give me 1 minute. I will take you through the screen to how to check that. Yeah, so we saw this, how to search the taxpayer. So go to the portal called gst.gov.in, right? There you have various options. One of the options is search taxpayer. For this, you don't need any login. Just go to search taxpayer. In the invoice, the supplier's GST has to be there, right? Because that is the source to check what is the status of the tax filings, what he's doing. First is you will have to go to search by taxpayer, click the GST number and enter the number, the characters, what is given. And then you'll get to know what is the status first of all. If he's regular filer, then and he's compliant with the law, because if it's not compliant, like we had seen in the chapter of cancellation, if for 6 months he's not filed the returns, then his registration gets cancelled. Okay, so say he's passed through this test, his status is active. Then you have a table below which says show the filing table and show return filing frequency. Okay, so if you click on show return frequent filing, it means that what is he? Is he a monthly filer or a quarterly filer? So you will see that for the financial year, latest financial year, or you can see even for the previous financial years, is for this taxpayer, the frequency is quarterly filing. So he's a quarterly filer. Then you can also see the status whether his latest returns has been filed. If you see, it says that GSTR3B, this is the monthly return or a quarterly return in case of a quarterly taxpayer. Since we had seen that this taxpayer is a quarterly taxpayer, he's been filing the returns on a quarterly basis. So latest quarter was December that he's filed, and his GSTR1 or IFF for January also is filed. So he's been a regular filer and he's filed the returns, annual returns. So this gives you some kind of confidence to say that whether he's filing the returns or no. Okay. Should invoice be always printed or should it be handwritten? Good question. Invoice can be handwritten also, because the basic requirement is that invoice should have sufficient details. So it can be handwritten also. If suppliers mention wrong GSTN, then we can take legal action. No, you don't have to take legal action. You could request him to correct it. Because if he's mentioning not your GST number, mentioning somebody else's GST number, it means it's a mistake. For mistake, you don't have to take legal action. You could request him and he could do the correction. Bhumi, your question is, if a person is applied for GST registration on 1st January, but he received registration on 1st February, then the supplies he made in the month of January, can he apply GST? Yes, he can apply GST. And once he gets the GST on the 1st February, then whatever invoices he's raised from 1st January to 31st January, he can raise a revised invoice with a GST number. So that's only one case where revision of invoices is permitted. In all other cases, your invoice cannot be revised, right? In all other cases, you have to if there is change in value, change in GST number, you have to do a correction online. In the invoice, you cannot make any further correction. Okay. Tanishka, second point in taxable service, which point are you saying? Taxable supply of services. You're saying in case of insurance, banking company, NBFC. Yeah. So the taxable supply of services, the time limit generally is once you finish the service, complete the service, within 30 days from the date of supply of service, you have to raise an invoice, right? And in case of a insurance company, banking company, or NBFC, when they supply to outsiders, for them the time limit is within 45 days from the date of completion of service, right? When it's an outsider, they have a time of 45 days. But if there is any internal cross billing from one branch to another branch, right? They have used the word if there is any taxable supplies between distinct persons. Okay, if there's any taxable supply between distinct persons, we know what's a distinct person. Within one PAN having multiple registrations is a distinct person. Then in case of a transaction within one PAN from one distinct person to another distinct person, the time limit for issue of invoice is the time when it is recorded in the supplier's book, saying that मैंने एक bank. Okay, so let's take an example of a insurance company. Insurance company has multiple branches, right, in multiple states. There is one insurance company, life insurance company. LIC has an office in Karnataka, one another office in Mumbai. Mumbai had some claim and the claim of the customer was given. Now they have to go for claim recovery because some kind of fraud had happened. Now Mumbai branch says that this insurance is at, we have provided the insurance, but the customer is in Bangalore. You go and do the recovery. So the company in Bangalore, the branch in Bangalore goes and does the recovery. The cost, whatever is incurred, it has to recover from Mumbai branch. Now, the invoice is not the criteria in this case. The criteria will be the when it is recorded in Karnataka's branch that they have to recover the charges from the Mumbai branch. That will be the time of supply. In case they have forgotten or they have missed recording in the supplier's book, the time of supply will be at the end of the quarter. So if they have done any recovery in March, by end of the quarter, by 31st March, they have to raise the invoice. Okay. If they don't raise, then whenever they raise later on, they have to pay it with interest. That is the implication of this time of supply. Rahul, can we reverse GST in case of bad debts? No. In case of bad debts, you cannot reverse the GST. So if supplier filed GSTR1, but he's not filed GSTR3B, it amounts to violation of non-payment of tax. Yes, it amounts to violation of non-payment of tax. If supply is made on April 23, still by March 24, unable to recover outstanding, then can we reverse GST amount while filing? No. So the question of raising a credit note and debit note will come at the end of the session. We will understand when a credit note and debit notes can be raised. But for bad debts, you cannot do any kind of corrections. Okay. Are you all with me? Are we going in a proper way? Are you understanding the points? Because I think we have had less interaction because the topics are in a way that we'll have to go. But let's see if you're having any kind of feedback so we could improvise now itself. Are you along with me? Are you understanding the points? Because I'm seeing very few questions being raised. That could be two meanings for that. One is you're understanding everything very clearly, or another way is you're not understanding anything. So which is it? I'm getting confused now. Please give me your responses. People who are not responding, please respond so that I know that what are you, what are you expecting? Okay, started getting response. Yes, it is clear. Your everything is clear. You're understanding everything. Good. Sure, Mayur. जब भी revision, when I revise something, I will explain it in Hindi also. That's a good valid feedback. Bhavika, tomorrow's notes, matlab yesterday's notes. Yes, yesterday's notes also I will send it with today's notes. It will get uploaded. Sure. Okay, good. So we are all with us. I am with you all and you all with me. So yes, we could go on this. Yes, there were some questions. If a banker charges the bank charges, then the banker issues a tax invoice. Yes. Generally, when you see that if you have a current account, right, the current account holders will get a separate invoice on a monthly basis because for every kind of SMS charges, for every kind of DD charges or kind of payments, they will take some charges. So monthly they give a invoice. Time and value of supply notes also not uploaded. Okay, I will tell that also. MCQ, yes, I will take MCQs from the next session for every topic so that you're clear with the topics. I will consider that, Harshit. Okay. So we understood the time of issue of invoice. Now there is what is the time limit for issue of continuous supply? To understand that, we'll understand what is the concept of continuous supply. We have discussed this before, so we'll just go with this quickly. Continuous supply of goods means a supply of goods which is provided or agreed to be provided continuously on a recurrent basis under a contract through various modes. It could be through a wire, cable, pipeline, or anything where the supply is happening continuously, for which the supplier invoices the recipient on a regular or periodic basis, wherein the agreement itself is such that the supplier invoices to the recipient on a regular or periodic basis and includes supply of such goods as the government may subject to such conditions may specify. So any supply which is happening continuously is a on a regular or periodic basis is a continuous supply of goods. Then continuous supply of services, the definition is where the supply is on a continuous basis, but there is a time limit here because for goods, though it is tangible. So whenever you supply, it's a continuous supply. Whenever you stop, it stops. But for services, the time limit is mentioned that you have to do a continuous supply for a period exceeding 3 years, 3 months, not 3 years, 3 months. But if it is for a period of 2 months, then it is not a continuous supply. So if I'm doing some work and I'm going extending for 2 months, at the end of 2 months, I will raise an invoice. It's a normal service, not a continuous supply of service. But if my duration of the service is more than 3 months, it lasts long for 5 months, then it is a continuous supply of service. I have to raise invoice on a periodic basis, right? That periodic basis is given in the time of supply, the time limit for issuance of invoice, where there is a continuous supply of goods. Then the time, like how we have discussed, the time limit for issue of invoice for regular goods and for regular services for continuous supply of goods says that when there is a continuous supply of goods, the time will be where the successive or statement of accounts or successive payments are involved before or at the time of each payment is issued or payment is received. Before that, you have to raise the invoice, because for continuous supply of goods, you have a condition that you have to raise the invoice or you should receive payment periodically. Before getting that periodic payment or before raising that before giving that milestone, you have to raise the invoice. For continuous supply of services, where could be various criteria where the due date of payment is ascertained from the contract. Okay, from the contract, you can ascertain what is the date of payment. Then on or before receiving that payment, you have to raise an invoice. Where the due date of the payment is not ascertainable, then supplier of service, whenever you receive the payment before that. And third instances where the payment is linked to completion of an event. One is receiving payment. Second is and it is ascertained, saying that every 30 days you have to get your payments. Okay. Then it is ascertained. Second is payment is not ascertainable. Then when you receive the payment before that. Third instance is payment is linked to completion of an event. Then on or before completion of that event, you have to raise an invoice. So this is the time limit before which you have to raise an invoice. Why GST in trading of shares is but not in investment? Gunjan, your question is not clear. Aisha, what is your question? Not clear with that. In case, Satish, your question is, in case of taxable supply of services, in case of insurance and banking company, when to issue invoice? In case of taxable of supply of services, in case of insurance company, within 45 days. So normally they will issue an invoice within 45 days of completion of service. Second point of continuous supply of services. Second is where the due date of payment is not ascertainable. Now, in a contract, they can say payment terms or they cannot say payment terms. If they are clearly specifying the payment terms, then before the date of payment, you have to raise an invoice. In case the payment terms is not ascertained, not clear, but it is on a random basis. So at the time of receipt of invoice, that will be the time of raising the invoice. So before you receive the payment, you have to raise an invoice. Practically, you will not know, right? So you have to raise the invoice after you receive the payment. Okay. Now, the time of supply of goods sent on approval basis, this also we know that the outer, you have sent some goods and the customer is not confirmed it. And you happily send the goods saying that, okay, once you approve it, then I will consider as sale. Otherwise, it is a just on sample basis or a goods sent on approval basis. When you send any goods on approval basis, the time limit will be within 6 months from the date of your removal, or when the buyer approves. The buyer can approve anytime, but if it takes more time to approve it, then you have an outer time limit of 6 months. Within 6 months, you have to raise an invoice. So either 6 months from the date of removal or the date when the buyer approves it, whichever is earlier. That is the time limit for issuance of invoice in case of goods sent on approval basis. Now, what are the details you have? The details we have is particulars of a tax invoice. Now we understood the time limit. Now we'll see what are the contents, which is required to be had in a tax invoice. Okay. So this is only a format which I've given. So based on this contents, this invoice has been prepared. What is this contents of this invoice? First, they say, of course, supplier's deed name, address is there. The important thing is his GST number should be mentioned. Then the heading tax invoice should be there to indicate that this is a tax invoice. It should have a serial numbering of the invoice number. If there is a challan, then challan number, PO number, delivery date, and the date of invoice. These are the prerequisites. Then the customer's name and customer's address and his GST number. This is important. For the goods part, what are the products? What is the HSN code? the quantity, rate, and the GST what you're charging. Because this is the basis where he will get credit, the GST amount, and you should also mention what kind of GST is. Because if it is an intrastate supply, you will charge CGST separately, SGST separately. If it's an interstate supply, you will charge. So this is a supply from Ahmedabad to Delhi. So it's an interstate supply. So IGST is getting charged. And the other details which is required. So there is a contents which says that what are all the necessary contents, what is required. Particulars of a tax invoice says that you should have the name, address, and GSTN of the supplier. So the law says that only the contents I will give you, you put this content in whatever format you want. But if these contents are there, then it's a valid invoice. You should have name, address, and GSTN of the supplier, a consecutive serial number not exceeding 16 characters in one or multiple series. So you can have multiple series, say for wholesale business, one series, for retail business, one series. I can have two different series that's permitted. It can contain alphabets, numerous, numerical, special characters. All of this is permitted for the invoice number. So this is basically a invoice number. You should have an invoice number. And it should be unique for a financial year. For each financial year, it's not that one is getting invoice number one. You can issue it 3 months, 3 times. So it should be unique for one financial year. The date of its issue, date of issue of the invoice. If recipient is registered, then name, address, and GSTN number of the recipient. If a recipient is an UIN holder, then is UIN number. If recipient is registered, then we'll mention name, address, and GSTIN. If the recipient is unregistered, we don't have to mention his GSTIN, right? But the law says that if your value is more than 50,000 rupees and the receiver is unregistered, you mention the name and address of the recipient and address of delivery along with the name of the state and its code. Okay. If you are supplying high value goods, high value for the purpose of invoicing is 50,000. Okay. If you are supplying it to an unregistered person, if it's registered even for 5 rupees worth of goods, you have to mention the name, address, and GSTN of the recipient. But if he is unregistered, आप सोचोगे if unregistered इसके लिए मैं क्या करूं, सिर्फ GST डाल के छोड़ देता हूं. No, आपको पूरा डिटेल्स डालना पड़ेगा अगर 50,000 के ऊपर है. If it is more than 50,000 rupees, you have to mention name and address of the recipient and the state. Yeah. Then if it is less than 50,000, then unregistered recipient may still request. So it's an optional thing. If it is less than 50,000 rupees, say 5,000 rupees ka supply hai, and the recipient is unregistered, you don't have to note his name and address. Okay. But if the recipient requires that you request, put these details, then you have to put it in the invoice compulsorily. Okay. Otherwise, it's an optional thing. So it is dependent on the supplier. If the supplier supplies value of goods more than 50,000 rupees, so he has to mention name and address of the recipient. If it's the delivery address is separate from the recipient's address, then the delivery address along with name of the state and the state code. Okay, each state has a code, that code you have to mention. If it is less than 50,000, then it's an optional thing. Then we have to mention HSN code. ये HSN code क्या है? It's a unique code which is given for each product. जो customs में harmonized system of nomenclature है, that same system is being adopted under GST, which says that for specific category of goods, you have to search the HSN for your goods and mention the HSN number, because identification of the goods and services happens through this harmonized system of nomenclature, जिसे हम HSN बोलते हैं. तो HSN मेंशन करना जरूरी है. HSN 8 डिजिट का होता है, लेकिन you don't have to mention full 8 digits. For some category of people, it is 4 digits. Some category of people, it is 6 digits. वो हम आगे देखेंगे. So based on whether you're a big supplier or a small supplier, you have to mention 6 or 4-digit codes. Then description of goods or services, ये तो important है ही है. HSN में नंबर रहेगा, लेकिन description तो actual में लिखना पड़ेगा. So description will be there. Quantity in case of goods and unit or unique quantity code thereof. ठीक है, अगर numbers में है तो numbers, weight में है तो kgs, if liquid form में है तो liters, that you have to mention. Total value of supply, ठीक है, before GST, what is the value? Then taxable value of supply of goods, just discount abatement. So discount, total value of the invoice less discount, then you will give a taxable value जिसके ऊपर tax चढ़ाना है. Then the rate of tax, मतलब अगर CGST SGST and the rate of goods is 18%, 9% CGST, 9% SGST. If it is IGST transaction, you will mention IGST at 18%. So specifically, you want to mention the rate and the amount of tax which you are charging separately. ऐसा नहीं कि consolidate एक ही मान लो, CGST कितना charge कर रहे हो, SGST कितना charge कर रहे हो, या independently mention करना चाहिए. Then place of supply along with the name of state. Okay. The place of supply along with name of state. अगर आप supply कर रहे हो कर्नाटक में तो कर्नाटका का place of supply कर्नाटका आएगा. So you have to mention the place of supply. Address of, अगर CGST ST charge कर रहे हो तो आपको पता ही है कि this is local supply, intrastate supply. You don't have to mention place of supply. If it is an interstate supply, then you have to mention the place of supply. The address of delivery in case bill to ship to transaction है. Then in case of ship to transaction is different, then you have to mention that address. If the tax is payable on reverse charge, matlab if there is an advocate, he is registered under GST, but he will not pay GST because it's under reverse charge, then he has to mention, is the supply liable to GST under reverse charge? Yes, he will have to mention that this supply is a supply which is liable to be paid tax under reverse charge basis. If he is registered, he will mention that. Then signature. Now it can be signed or it could be digitally signed. Both are permitted. Either it could be signed or it could be digitally signed by the supplier. Then quick response code. This is a new amendment which has been come last 1 or 2 years, wherein you will have to mention a QR code in case of a E-invoice and in case of a non-E-invoice also. जब हम E-invoice समझेंगे तब we'll understand this, saying that there is a requirement of uploading all of these details electronically. अगर supplier का criteria match होता है, तो then he has to mention all of these details on the portal and he has to raise one E-invoice. जब वो E-invoice raise कर देंगे, तब वो E-invoice raise कर दिया करके that number has to come on the invoice. That's an additional requirement. Okay. So E-invoice हो गया और QR code. जैसे क्विक पेमेंट करने के लिए QR कोड रहता है, that QR code also some category of taxpayers will have to mention. So apart from basic requirements, this is a new requirement. Then if the taxpayer is exempted from raising E-invoice, जैसे 10 crores का लिमिट है E-invoice के लिए, अब मेरा टर्नओवर तो क्रॉस हो रहा है लेकिन मैं exempted हूँ. So then I have to give a declaration saying that even though my turnover is crossing the limits, I am exempted from raising a E-invoice. That's why I have exempted. I have not raised a E-invoice. E-invoice क्या है? We'll come to know. But समझ लीजिए that apart from invoice, there is a new requirement of providing these details online and getting a E-invoice. That is a new requirement. Okay. Clear with this part? Where the time of supply of goods sent on approval basis is time of removal. Where the time of supply of goods sent on approval basis is time of removal or approval of recipient. So approval of the recipient, but if the approval doesn't come within 6 months from the time of removal, then the time of supply is 6 months from the time of removal. That's why there are two criteria in the case of goods sent on approval basis. If the supplier deducts discount after charging GST, is it valid? It can be valid because if you charge before, then you will pay less GST. Say the value of goods is 10,000 rupees. Now you have agreed at a discount of 1,000 rupees. So if you reduce the discount before charging GST, then you will charge GST on what value? 10,000 minus 1,000, obviously on 9,000 rupees. So you will pay GST less. But if you charge 10,000, add GST, then reduce the discount, tax to government ka pura jayega. So what is the benefit you get by deducting discount after adding GST? That you'll have to see, but generally will not do that. E-invoice is part of a tax invoice or separate from it. Uh, so E-invoice is actually part of tax invoice itself, but you will have to raise both. So E-invoice doesn't means that your normal tax invoice you will not raise. You will raise a normal tax invoice. Additionally, you will upload the details of your invoice on a GST portal, and GST portal will give you a unique number saying that, okay, we have captured all your details, and this number you can use it. So that is a e-invoicing aspect. Okay. So we got the contents. Next is what are the minimum requirements? Agar pure requirements nahi ho, then the rule says at least minimum requirements has to be there. What are those requirements? GST IN of the supplier and recipient, description of the goods, total value of supply of goods, what are the amount of tax charge, the place of supply. At least these should be the minimum requirements. Now, HSN, we said that there is a requirement that you have to mention the HSN. If your annual turnover in the previous financial year is just below 5 crores, okay, then you can mention 4 digits of B2B supply. B2B, we understand that from one registered person to another registered person, if there is any supply, it's called as a B2B supply. Okay, so for any B2B supply, up to 4 digits of HSN you mentioned. For B2C supply, it's optional. Okay, so for a small trader year means up to 5 crores worth of turnover in the preceding financial year. Then if you're making B2B supply, then up to 4 digits you mention HSN. And for B2C supply, you can mention 4, or if you want, you don't have to, you don't mention it. But if your turnover crosses more than 5 crores, you're a big taxpayer. Then you have to mention for both B2B and B2B supplies up to 6 digits of HSN code. Okay. Bhavika, I don't have access to e-invoice. So I'll not be able to share you the portal how you see the e-invoice. If you give discount on bill, the tax will be applied after discount or before discount. Tax will be applied after discount. Because discount, if it is permit, is actually discount provisions. When we read valuation, we said that what are the conditions basis which you can give discount, right? If the discount is related to the sales and it is agreed at the time of supply, you can reduce from the value. So if you can reduce from the value, you will reduce it from the value and pay taxes after reducing the discount. Clear, Devesh? HSN, then how many copies of invoice you have to give? You have to give triplicate copy in case you are supplying for goods. One original copy for the recipient, one duplicate copy for the transporter, and triplicate copy for the supplier. So when you do supply of goods, you have to raise invoice in 3 copies. If you are raising a supply invoice for supply of services, then duplicate because transporter is not there. Original for the recipient and duplicate for the supplier. Yeah. So we were registered and I apply for registration, but there's a time lag when I get a registration. So once I know that I have crossed my threshold, I have applied for registration. Then what happens for those supplies when I applied for registration and by the time I get registration? Yeah. So हर चीज यहाँ पे it's not so fast. Unlike कि you apply today and you'll get the registration immediately. The officer will also have to verify. You have to give some time, right? So by the time they take up, you cannot hold down your business because you are already dealing with your businesses. You had your turnover below the threshold limit. That's why you didn't raise. Now the threshold is crossed. My customer will not wait. So customer ko I have to charge GST from the date when my threshold crosses. My threshold is crossed. I have applied for GST. So in that case, what happened? Every registered person who has been granted registration with effect from a date earlier than the date of issue of certificate of registration. When will they give this? Is it permitted that they will give a registration with effect from a date earlier than the date of issuance of certificate of registration? So when will the tax officer give give a registration from a date prior to the date of registration? Yes, Rahul, your answer is correct. Diksha, your answer is also correct. Okay, others, when do you think you can get a registration not from the date when the officer gives it, but prior to that also? Pritesh, you're also partly right. Okay. Okay. So when will the officer give a registration prior dated is when I've applied on time. I've crossed my threshold and I've applied within 30 days when it's crossed. Then I will get a registration from the date when it is applicable from. Okay. And even in case of a compulsory registration, I have to apply it at the time of registration itself. When I've formed a company, I have to apply. So I've applied it within 30 days of my formation. Then I will get a registration certificate from the date of my incorporation itself. So in such cases, when I get a registration from a date earlier than the date of issuance of certificate of registration, I am entitled to issue a revised tax invoice. Such invoice will be issued against the commercial invoice which is already issued, because when I applied and I had not mentioned that my GSTI number, then I would have issued a commercial tax invoice. But once I get the GST number, I can revise the invoice. Revised tax invoice shall be issued within 1 month from the date of issuance of certificate of registration. It's not that all the customers who have been sold, they will come later on, or you will raise invoices at any point of time. There's an outer time limit. Aapko registration aa gaya, within 1 month, you raise a revised tax invoice. Okay. Then registered person may issue a consolidated revised tax invoice. Say you have had multiple invoices, you can issue a revised consolidated tax invoice in respect of supplies made to an unregistered recipient, because anyways, unregistered person will not be able to claim the credit. For them, you can raise a consolidated tax invoice. However, in case of interstate supplies, a consolidated revised tax invoice cannot be issued in respect of all unregistered person if the value of supply exceeds 2.5 lakhs. So in case of unregistered taxable person, if the value exceeds 2.5 lakhs, you have to give individual invoice. Below 2.5 lakhs, you can give a consolidated invoice. ठीक है. So revised tax invoice क्या कहता है कि आपने registration ले लिया. Registration लेने से पहले जो भी आपने सप्लाई किया है, तो आपका जब registration prior dated का है, तब आप 1 महीने registration के 1 महीने तक पुराने सेल्स का रिवाइज्ड इनवॉइस रेज कर सकते हो, ताकि कस्टमर को उसका क्रेडिट मिल सके. आप अनरजिस्टर्ड सप्लायर्स को, अनरजिस्टर्ड कस्टमर्स को जब सप्लाई करते हो, तब दोबारा एक एक इनवॉइस रेज करने की जरूरत नहीं है. कंसोलिडेटेड इनवॉइस रेज कर सकते हो. लेकिन इस कंसोलिडेटेड का भी एग्जेम्पशन है, जो बोलता है कि अगर आप 2.5 लाख रुपए के ऊपर किसी को अनरजिस्टर्ड को सप्लाई करते हो, तब आपको इंडिविजुअल इनवॉइसेस रेज करना पड़ेगा, कंसोलिडेटेड नहीं चलेगा. वो भी सिर्फ इंटरस्टेट के लिए. ठीक है. इफ वी आर एलिजिबल टू टेक बट वी डोंट टेक, तो फिर आपके पुराने इनवॉइसेस पे आप जीएसटी कस्टमर्स को नहीं दे सकते हो. ठीक है. अगर आप टाइम पे रजिस्टर करते हो, तभी आप रिवाइज इनवॉइस रेज कर सकते हो, वरना आप नहीं रेज कर पाओगे. नो इश्यू ऑफ टैक्स इनवॉइस. अच्छी बात है, हमने कह दिया कि रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन को इनवॉइस करना है, इनवॉइस की इतने कंडीशंस कह दिए. अब ये भी देख लें कि जब व्हेन इज देयर नो रिक्वायरमेंट टू इश्यू अ टैक्स इनवॉइस. वाओ, दिस इज अ बेनिफिट, राइट? A registered person may not issue a tax invoice when if the value of goods or services is less than 200 rupees. Very minuscule है ना. 200 rupees तो बहुत कम है. एटलीस्ट 2000 रुपीज रहना चाहिए, बिकॉज इन सच केसेस इवन इफ द कस्टमर डजंट पे, आई विल पे इट फ्रॉम माय पॉकेट. इट्स परमिटेड, राइट? क्योंकि यू हैव टू पे जीएसटी, एंड इफ द वैल्यू इज वेरी लेस, यू डोंट रेज अ इनवॉइस, यू पे इट फ्रॉम योर पॉकेट. तो हियर द पॉइंट इज नॉन इश्यू ऑफ टैक्स इनवॉइस डजंट मीन आपका टैक्स में छूट मिल जाएगा. नहीं, यू डोंट गेट एग्जेम्पशन फ्रॉम, you get discount key, you don't pay GST. That is not the credit. That's not the case. You don't issue an invoice is the case. But all this 200 rupees, अगर आपके बहुत सारे sales है, you can consolidate that and pay taxes to the government. Taxation से आपको कुछ भी benefit नहीं मिलेगा, because you have to pay it from your pocket. So आप decide करो कि आपको हर रुपए पे चाहिए, तो raise an invoice. And if it is computerized things, when you buy smaller things in a supermarket, everything is generated, so it will raise. But there's an option given saying that if your value of the goods is below 200, you have an option of not raising an invoice when the recipient is unregistered and the recipient does not demand. If he demands, then you have to raise. If he does not demand, then you don't have to raise it. Instead, such registered person shall issue a consolidated tax invoice for such supplies at the close of each day, ताकि आपको छोटे छोटे इनवॉइस का ट्रैक नहीं रख के आप कंसोलिडेट भी रेस कर सकते हो. Then bill of supply, a registered person. So till now we heard about tax invoice, the conditions. Now we'll also understand on bill of supply. A registered person who is supplying exempted goods. ठीक है, क्योंकि इस goods exempted होते हैं, तो उसके ऊपर टैक्स नहीं लगेगा. So a person who is supplying exempted goods or paying tax under composition levy. We heard this, right? We learned this, that under composition levy, you cannot collect tax from a customer. So only in these two cases, you don't issue a tax invoice, you will issue another document called as bill of supply. Bill of supply में details क्या रहेगा? All the details, name, address of the GSTN of the supplier, consecutive serial number, date of issue of invoice, recipient, if he's registered, his name, address, and GSTN. Even though he cannot claim the credit, but still you have to mention this. HSN codes, taxable value, but tax will not be there, so tax will be 0. Signature, description, HSN, those things will be there. And if you supply both taxable goods and HS and exempted goods, then you will issue invoice cum bill of supply when supplying both to a URD person. Okay. So if you are supplying it both taxable supplies and exempted supplies, you will issue invoice cum bill of supply. Clear with this? Bill number may be changed in the revised invoice or same. Bill number in the revised invoice can be changed because in case of revision of invoice, in that instance, what we said, you would have issued initially commercial invoice. Now you will, in the revised invoice, you will change the bill numbers. You will raise a new series of invoice numbers that is permitted. Hemlata, abatement. Where is the concept of abatement coming? And under what context are you saying abatement? फुल फॉर्म ऑफ यूआईएन यूनिक आइडेंटिफिकेशन नंबर जो हमने बताया था ना लास्ट रजिस्ट्रेशन में that if you are supplying if there is a United Nations organization's entity, then they will have to take a separate number called UIN. So in case we supply exempt or non-taxable supply, then we should have to issue a tax invoice then. Generally, if it is a exempt, because if you are dealing only in exempt supplies, then you'll have bill of supply. If you're dealing with both taxable supplies and exempt supplies, then you'll have one invoice itself called tax invoice, and you will issue only tax invoice. But if you're not dealing both, then for this series, for taxable goods, tax invoice, and for exempted goods, the bill of supply, that will not be required. You could have one tax invoice. You can mention tax is 0 for exempted goods there. E-invoice and e-way bill. In case of bill of supply, e-invoice and e-way bill, e-way bill and e-invoice. E-way bill will be required because e-way bill is for any movement of goods, right? So in case of bill of supply, also e-way bill will be required, but e-invoice may not be required because in case of exempted goods, e-invoice will not be there. Value of supply of goods or services are both taking into account discount or abatement. Okay. So what is abatement is that in the exemption chapter, they say that when you supply specified goods, okay, the value will be not the value what you supply, but they will give you some abatement. A typical example is in case of supply of real estate, the rate is mentioned in the rate as 7.5%. And then it says that you will get a abatement of 1/3 of a value. मतलब जब आप supply of building with land करते हो, then on the land is an immobile property, right? So on that immobile property, you don't have to charge GST. So the mechanism what the government has said, charge the value will be full. Then 1/3 value is abatement. Okay. So 1/3 is called as abatement. You will reduce that abatement, and on the balance 2/3 you will charge GST. Okay. So that is the concept of abatement. Aisha, what is GST MTP coming tomorrow? I am not clear on this. If a dealer making both exempted and taxable supplies, but while supplying to one person, I am selling only taxable goods, then it's tax invoice come bill of supply or just tax invoice? Just tax invoice. If tax bill not raised below 200, then how can we take receipt of the same? Bill raised without tax, no bill raised. See, receipts you can still take. So if the customer pays you without bill, it's fine. If the customer insists for a bill, then you give a bill. So it's only a case where the customer doesn't require, then you can raise a consolidated bill. Since the value, that's why the value limit for per supply is very less, right? Below 200 rupees, customer may not ask. Then you can raise a consolidated invoice. Can we issue a register person tax invoice when we supply exempted goods? Yes, you can still give it. So the condition is when you're supplying only exempted goods, then you don't have to issue a tax invoice. But if you're having a concept of taxable goods and exempted goods, then you'll have tax invoice itself. Paying tax under composition levy, is it for recipient? Paying tax under composition levy is for the supplier. The supplier only will pay taxes from his pocket in case of composition levy. Okay. What is a receipt voucher? Now, they have multiple documents. We will go through them one by one. One is tax invoice, bill of supply. Next is receipt voucher. Our registered person shall on receipt of advance. So you raise an invoice, you get money, that's fine. But if you get any advance, then you have to issue a receipt voucher saying that you have received it. Why? Because in case of receipt of money for services, GST is paid on receipt basis, but for receipt of money for goods, GST is exempted, right? You have to pay it at the time of issue of invoice. But since the law still has this concept, so you have to issue a receipt voucher for every receipt what you get. So even for goods and services, both you still have to issue a receipt voucher. Now this will have mostly same details, name, address and GSTN of the supplier, consecutive serial number, tax invoice का series number separate रखो, receipt voucher का series number separate रखो, date of issue, if the recipient is registered, his details, then description of goods or services, if you are knowing at the time, rate of tax, amount of tax charge, everything. So one question which comes here is, on receipt, I have to, should I pay GST? Secondly, what will be my rate? And thirdly, will the recipient be able to claim the credit on the basis of a receipt voucher? Bhavika, after receipt voucher concept, we'll take a break. So let's understand the question on what will be the rate of tax on the basis of receipt voucher? Will the recipient be able to claim the credit? But under composition levy, supplier won't get GST-IN. Under composition levy, supplier will get GST-IN. Why will he not get? He will have to register. That's when he will be entitled to do his business. Under composition levy, Mayur, there is a concept that he will have to register and get GST-IN. He will get a GST-IN. Only in case of a UIN, we said he will not get, but UIN holder will get a unique number. But composition levy, he will get a GST-IN. Yes, we have to remember this concept for exams and practical aspects also, Harshit. Right. So I'm getting correct answers. 18% tax will be applicable. Yes. So if you are getting a receipt for a goods or a service, which you know what is the rate, then you will charge that rate, right? Suppose I am providing a hotel services or providing a restaurant services, and I know the rate of my restaurant services 5%. For all restaurants, it's 5%. So I will charge 5% on the receipt voucher. If it is at 18%, I will charge 18% because on receipt itself, I have to pay GST. So I've paid it. Now, if I don't know if I have dealing in multiple goods and multiple services, then I will charge one rate of 18%. But my other next question is, will the recipient get the credit of GST? Everybody is saying that yes, recipient will get GST. Correct. Mayur, your answer is right. We cannot claim credit on receipt voucher since ITC on advance payment is not allowed. To claim ITC, you have to actually receive the goods or actually receive the services, right? So you will not get the credit in case of a receipt voucher. Okay, so don't claim credit on the basis of a receipt voucher. Now, receipt voucher, where at the time of receipt of advance, rate of tax is not determinable, then you will charge rate as 18%. And if the nature of supply is not determinable, so that you will make interstate supply or intrastate supply, it is not known, then you will charge interstate supply. So the law says that in doubt, you have to apply 18% and the transaction you have to treat it as interstate supply. Okay. Okay. So we'll take a break here and meet at 7:30. you. So we understood receipt voucher. Now let's go to refund voucher. So you have got a receipt, and I would say you have issued an invoice also, or where on receipt of advance payment with respect of any supply of goods or services or both, the registered person issues a receipt invoice, but subsequently there is no supply. Okay? If there is no supply made and no tax invoice is issued in pursuance thereof, then the registered person may issue to the person who has made the payment a refund voucher against such payment. So for refund of the amount, refund invoice will be issued, and payment voucher. One is receipt voucher, refund voucher, one is payment voucher. When is payment voucher issued? When a registered person who is liable to pay tax under reverse charge. Okay. I am liable to pay tax under reverse charge. I will issue a payment voucher. Okay. The supplier will give a receipt voucher. The receiver will give a payment voucher, and the receiver will give payment voucher not in all instances. Okay, he will not give in all instances. He will give only in case where he has to make payment under reverse charge to the government in that instance. A registered person who is liable to pay tax under reverse charge shall issue a payment voucher at the time of making payment to the supplier in respect of goods or services received under reverse charge. So, person who is receiving the services on which he has to pay reverse charge, he will make a payment voucher and make the payment to the supplier, because supplier may not be registered, right? If he is a registered, he will raise a normal invoice. But if he is a person who is under reverse charge, I am to pay under reverse charge, and he is not registered, then I will make a payment voucher. Now, invoice and payment voucher, in case of reverse charge, invoice and payment voucher has to be issued. So reverse charge invoice, like the normal case is the supplier raises an invoice, but in reverse charge scenarios, the receiver will raise an invoice. So that's the best part in GST, that the receiver also raises an invoice. It's called as self-invoice. When he will raise, in case of section 9.3 cases, we know itself, when lawyer, GTA raises invoice, we have to pay reverse charge. But in section 9.4 also reverse charge will come. When it will come? If there is a builder or promoter who purchases goods, because for them, they can't claim ITC and they have to pay GST at 5%. Now, there is a limit which says that 80% of their input should be from registered person. Now, if they purchase less than 80% from registered person, for the differential, they have to pay the tax, right? And if it is cement is received from an unregistered person, then also they have to pay tax. So any purchases which they make from unregistered person, on that they have to pay taxes. That's why they will be under the obligation to pay the taxes. So when it will happen is, invoice and payment voucher should be issued by the recipient in the following cases where the recipient is registered, right? I am registered. I am receiving supplies on reverse charge basis under 9.3 or 9.4.2 scenarios. If under 9.3, then if the supplier is registered, and in case where supplier is unregistered, recipient will issue a payment voucher. So irrespective of whether the supplier is registered or unregistered, I will give a payment voucher. And under 9.4, the supplier would always be unregistered, because if he is registered, then I don't have to pay anything. Correct? If he is registered, I don't have to pay anything under 9.4. So I will give a payment voucher. Now, when I will raise an invoice, same scenario, if the supplier is registered, I will not raise an invoice. If supplier is unregistered, both in case of 9.3 or 9.4, I will raise a self-invoice. Clear? So there are two things. One is payment voucher, one is invoice. Payment voucher always will be raised, irrespective of whether supplier is registered or unregistered. But invoice will be raised only when the supplier is unregistered. ठीक है, इसको आप हिंदी में समझ जाएंगे. देखिए, जब रिवर्स चार्ज का क्वेश्चन आता है, तब आपको रिवर्स चार्ज पे करना है. अब दो सिनारियोज हो सकते हैं कि सप्लायर रजिस्टर्ड है या अनरजिस्टर्ड है. अगर सप्लायर रजिस्टर्ड है या अनरजिस्टर्ड, दोनों केस में आपको पेमेंट वाउचर तो बनाना ही है. लेकिन इनवॉइस अब इसी केस में करोगे जब सप्लायर अनरजिस्टर्ड है। ये हो गया नॉर्मल रिवर्स चार्ज। अब स्पेशल रिवर्स चार्ज होता है 9(4). जब भी आप बिल्डर से कुछ, जब बिल्डर बिल्डर कुछ परचेज करता है, उसका टैक्स सिस्टम ऐसा है कि उसका आउटवर्ड तो 5% है और इनपुट के ऊपर उसको क्रेडिट नहीं मिलेगा। तो बिल्डर क्या करेगा, पूरे सप्लाईज 5% पे कर लेगा। जो अपने परचेजेस है वो क्या करेगा, अनरजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से लेने की कोशिश करेगा, ताकि जो रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन है वो उसको चार्ज करेंगे जीएसटी और उसका क्रेडिट वो नहीं ले सकता है। तो फिर वो कोशिश ये करेगा मैं कम से कम अनरजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से लूं, कम से कम रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से लूं, अनरजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से ज्यादा खरीदूं। तो उससे गवर्नमेंट का लॉस है, तो इसलिए गवर्नमेंट ने एक कैप बना दिया है कि आप 80% रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से ही ले सकते हो, सिर्फ 20% अनरजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से ले सकते हो। ठीक है। लेकिन कुछ कारण अगर बिल्डर 70% रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से लेता है और 30% अनरजिस्टर्ड पर्सन से, तो इसका मतलब गैप कितना हुआ, 10%। तो अगर ये 10% उसने सीमेंट परचेज किया है तो उसको 28% पे करना है, क्योंकि सीमेंट के ऊपर रेट 28% है। और दूसरे सर्विसेज लिया है तो उसको रेस्पेक्टिव 18% पे करना पड़ेगा। तब वो अनरजिस्टर्ड पर्सन जो 10% है, उनके लिए वो क्या करेगा, वो रेस करेगा इनवॉइस और पेमेंट वाउचर, दोनों ही चीज। ठीक है। Yeah, if place of supply and percentage of tax is not known and 18% IGST is paid in advance receipt at the time of issue of receipt of goods and issue of invoice, it is noticed that it should be CGST and SGST, then rate is other than 18%. Yeah, in that case, you will reverse this, or you will set off the advance whatever you have paid with other invoices, and you will correct it in the subsequent month. If supplier is registered, then no need to issue payment voucher. No, in that case, payment voucher is still required. So that is being clarified here, that even if the supplier is registered and you have to pay reverse charge, then you have to still issue a payment voucher. In case of reverse charge, you will issue a payment voucher in all scenarios. But invoices you will raise only if the supplier is unregistered. Yes, same Lata. When supplier is unregistered, recipient issues a self invoice. And what if advance received GST paid, then advance is refunded due to cancellation of order? Yeah, advance received GST paid, then you can reverse that also. You can reverse the GST. Explain again the cement portion, that in case of the shortfall from the 80% is that you are purchasing from unregistered person, from an unregistered cement dealer, you're purchasing cement, then you have to pay GST at 28%. For all other unregistered persons, purchases from unregistered person, you will pay 18%. But for purchase of cement, you will pay 28% because the rate on cement itself is at higher rate. Clear on this concept of payment voucher and invoicing? Okay. In certain instances, you can issue a document other than a tax invoice. Specified people can issue a invoice. Everybody should give an invoice, but there is an exception saying that these special category of people, you give other document, we will consider it as a invoice itself. Good example to understand this is a train ticket. On train tickets, there is GST payable if it's a AC coach. So should the IRCTC, the railway, should it give you a ticket and an invoice? No. They're saying that ticket number in any form by whatever name called is itself considered as an invoice. So if the rail ticket is there, they will mention GST in that. That should be sufficient. And insurance companies, all mandatory information, if they give in a policy, they give a policy premium receipt. That premium receipt itself will be treated as an invoice. Now, for the purpose of their compliances, they can issue a consolidated invoice. That should be sufficient. A GTA, if he gives a consignment note, which has details of the gross weight, name of the consignor and consignee, registration number of the vehicle, GST and of the person paying tax, that should be sufficient. Passenger transport service, we understood the ticket. Admission to cinema theater, okay, cinematographics in multiplex, there, if they give an electronic ticket, that itself is deemed as a tax invoice. And details of the recipient is optional. Okay. Then we'll see a concept of delivery challan. Okay. In case of special category of people, they can give a delivery challan like supply of LPG, where the quantity at the time of removal from the place of business is not known. Then they will give a delivery challan, because some items we will not get to know. Okay. And such cases is one is a LPG gas, because you will fill it and sell it. Okay. At the time of gassing station itself, you will get to know how much is the quantity, because where at the time of filling, at the time of putting it into the big tankers, you will not know the quantity. Once you remove the gas from a big tanker to a smaller tanker, then the meter reading happens. Okay. So the gas reading happens at the time of discharge. That's when the quantity will be known. That's the reason they've said that you can issue a delivery challan based on the assumed quantity. Okay. At least you issue a delivery challan. Delivery challan is a document which gives, which is equivalent to an invoice, but it will not have a complete components of the value of tax, because in these instances you will not know the value, right? First, in case of a LPG, you are moving the goods, so any movement of goods, we'll have to have two documents, either a tax invoice with e-way bill or a delivery challan with e-way bill. So in this case, you will issue a delivery challan and a e-way bill. Okay. So delivery challan mein you'll mention what is the approximate quantity and remove the goods. Once the quantity is known, you will raise a tax invoice. Second is when you're transporting goods for job worker. There you're not making a supply. So where supply, there we will raise a tax invoice and we'll raise a bill of supply. If it is a non-supply transaction, but there is a movement of goods happening, right? So what will happen if delivery challan is not there? They will tell we've not raised a tax invoice. तो फिर आप सेल कर रहे हो या कुछ घपला कर रहे हो, क्या पता चलेगा? तो उसका ट्रैक तो रहना चाहिए ना, इसीलिए डिलीवरी चालान रेस करते हैं, क्योंकि मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स है, तब सप्लायर का आइडेंटिफिकेशन होना चाहिए, आप किसको सप्लाई करो ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. दैट्स व्हाई यू विल इशू अ डिलीवरी चालान. ठीक है. सो डिलीवरी चालान जब इशू करोगे, उसमें जब मैं जॉब वर्क को देता हूँ, मेरे ही गुड्स है, मैं तो सेल नहीं कर रहा हूँ, द गुड्स विल कम बैक टू मी, राइट? तब डिलीवरी चालान आई विल रेज. So on the delivery challan, I will not charge the tax. I will mention the goods and will mention the value of the goods also, right? So transportation of goods for job worker, transportation of goods for reason other than by way of supply. ठीक है. जब मैं टेस्टिंग के लिए कुछ प्रोडक्ट्स सप्लाई करता हूँ, ठीक है, वेइंग करने के लिए कि कितना केजी है, देन ऑल्सो एनी मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स अदर देन सप्लाई जो भी मैं करता हूँ, that time I have to raise a delivery challan. Then such other supplies as may be notified by the government. कुछ और सप्लाई है जो गवर्नमेंट बोलती है कि नहीं आपको इनवॉइस नहीं रेज करना है, डिलीवरी चलान रेज करना है, दैट टाइम आई विल रेज अ डिलीवरी चलान. These are also should be serially numbered, like how tax invoice, receipt voucher, payment voucher के लिए अलग series होता है. For delivery challan also you should have a separate series. What are the contents? Again, delivery challan interplicate for the supplier, for the transporter, and for the recipient. Date and number of the delivery challan will be mentioned. Name and address of the GST and of the consignor if registered, and of the consignee if he is registered. HSN code and description of the goods. Quantity, provisional when exact quantity being supplied is not known. जैसे LPG case में provisional है, then I will mention the provisional quantity. What is the taxable value? What is the tax rate and tax amount? And place of supply. Is GST is paid in advance received against supply of goods also, or only in case of supply of services? Rahul, only in case of supply of services on advance we pay GST. In case of supply of goods, advance on supply of goods, GST is not payable because it is exempted. Clear with this? Harish, your question is GST payable on advance received in case of export? What do you think? Is your question correct? Please relook at the question. If e-way bill is prepared on the basis of delivery challan, is it necessary that delivery challan value, e-way bill value, and tax invoice value should match? Not necessary, because when you raise a delivery challan, e-way bill and delivery challan has to be definitely matched, because e-way bill cannot take a value different than the base document. So in case of a delivery challan, that is the base document, that value has to match with e-invoice. And tax invoice should 90% match. But in cases where it is approximate value, then it could be different and it can be justified. But if you know the value and if you mentioned wrong value, then it is incorrect. So in case of LPG cases, or in case of cement cases where the quantity is not known, or it can get changed, there could be wastage. There, in such cases, the tax invoice and the delivery challan value can change, but only in such exceptional cases, not in other cases. In delivery challan, tax amount is not mentioned only in case of a job worker. Okay. In case of job worker, I said, not in all cases. Okay. In job worker cases, you're not charging GST, there it will be 0. In other cases, wherever you're delivering some goods and invoice you're raising later on, there you will mention the tax value. Like in case of LPG, tax is charged, right? So on the basis of the projected value, you will charge GST. You will have to mention the GST. E-way bill and delivery challan are same? No. E-way bill is different. Delivery challan is different. What is an e-way bill? Let's understand this now. That when I am supplying goods to anybody, so this movement of goods, I will give an invoice, right? Now, when I gave this invoice, with one invoice, what few people used to do is used to deliver to multiple people. So I will raise an invoice from Bangalore to Chennai. I have 3 customers in Chennai. To avoid taxes, I'll tell that one invoice I'm giving to 3 customers, I'll give copies to this. So the government was losing revenue because a lot of people were doing this tampering. Give one invoice and 3 customers. How will they know which customer it is getting reached to? They cannot go beyond each and every conveyance. They cannot go beyond each and every lorry here. So they said, okay, at the check post, we'll check and we'll allow. That is what they can do. Check post पे allow कर दिया, फिर कहाँ पे deliver हुआ पता नहीं है. So that's why they said that ये जो system of invoicing है, all these details you upload on a system which is called as e-way bill system. Once you upload on the e-way bill system, the supplier, you will get your number, your customer's GST number also will come. So then we will have a track that where are the goods moving from and where is it reaching to. Because both the GST numbers are there. Now the customer, when he receives the goods, his GST number also is mentioned. So there will be a track. that goods are moving from which place to which place. So there they cannot give multiple GSTINs. So there the duplication or this फर्जी बिलिंग is stopped. ठीक है, आप फर्जी बिल रेज नहीं करोगे फिर एटलीस्ट टू द एक्सटेंट कि एक बिल में 3 बिल कर रहे हो, वो तो स्टॉप हो जाएगा, एक ही जीएसटी में मेंशन करोगे. फिर अगर आपको दूसरा कंसाइनमेंट दूसरे कस्टमर को देना है फिर उसका जीएसटी आइन मेंशन करना पड़ेगा. सो दिस वाज द मेन रीजन. और फिर अगर ऑन द वे ट्रांसपोर्टेशन कर रहे हो तब चेक पोस्ट ऑफिसर रहते हैं हु कैन चेक योर इनवॉइस, चेक योर ई-वे बिल, सब डिटेल सही है या नहीं है वो भी चेक कर सकते हैं. इसीलिए क्या हुआ, दिस ई-वे बिल केम इन दैट अपार्ट फ्रॉम रेजिंग इनवॉइस और अपार्ट फ्रॉम रेजिंग डिलीवरी नोट आपको ई-वे बिल रेज करना है ऑन द पोर्टल. पोर्टल से एक नंबर आएगा विच यू विल मेंशन ऑन योर इनवॉइस एज अ ई-वे बिल. ठीक है, सो ई-वे बिल इज बेसिकली अ डॉक्यूमेंट फॉर मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स. ई-वे बिल सप्लाई है ये साबित नहीं करता है. क्यों? क्योंकि जब मैं जॉब वर्क को सप्लाई करता हूँ दैट आई एम नॉट मेकिंग अ सप्लाई, आई एम जस्ट ओनली गिविंग हिम द गुड्स ताकि वो उसके ऊपर कुछ प्रोसेस कर सके एंड ही विल सेंड द गुड्स बैक टू मी. सो इट्स नॉट अ सप्लाई. सो आई विल नॉट रेज द टैक्स इनवॉइस. व्हाट विल आई रेज? आई विल रेज अ डिलीवरी चालान. नाउ डिलीवरी चालान है, इज दैट सफिशिएंट? नहीं, because for every movement of goods I have to raise a e-invoice. I have to raise a e-way bill, sorry. So for this, I will raise the e-way bill along with a delivery challan. E-way bill is for registered person only? Yes, mostly for registered person. But we saw, no, in case of handicraft goods or craftsman goods, they will get, even though they're unregistered, they will get a login for e-way bill. And only for them, they will get the access for e-way bill. Such specified category of people. But generally, unregistered person will not get it. Himlata, e-invoice links in page 10.25 is not working. Okay, you can just try that same nomenclature. You put it on the Google, it will work. Might be that specific link is not working. That's fine, but put that the same terms on the browser, you will get it. Clear? Understood the concept of e-way bill? Okay. So we understood delivery challan. Now, what happens if I transport goods in SKD or CKD condition? What is SKD? Semi knockdown or completely knockdown condition. जब मेरा लिफ्ट का एक एग्जांपल लेता हूं मैं, जब लिफ्ट इंस्टॉल करना पड़ता है तो लिफ्ट डायरेक्टली वहां से उठ के नहीं आता है क्योंकि इतना बड़ा लिफ्ट नहीं आ सकता है, उसके पार्ट्स वहां पे बनते हैं. जब यहाँ पे आएगा तब वो अलग अलग कंसाइनमेंट में आएगा, अलग अलग batches में आएगा. So when it comes in separate consignments, right? Each consignment is broken up. They will put separate parts in various consignments and send it. And here it will be assembled at the site and a lift is constructed. So the supplier shall issue the complete invoice before dispatch of the first consignment. Okay? Multiple trucks में जा रहे हैं, एक ट्रक आगे जाएगा, एक पीछे आएगा, but it is one commodity, right? It is one commodity for one invoice. So they will issue the complete invoice before dispatch. क्योंकि एक ट्रक में क्या है उसका अलग इनवॉइस, दूसरे ट्रक में क्या है, that becomes very difficult. So it's one product dispatched in various batches, dispatched in various consignments, right? So the supplier will issue one invoice. The supplier shall issue a delivery challan for each of the subsequent consignments. Because every moment should be supported with the document. So I will issue the first invoice for the first consignment. And for the subsequent consignments, I will issue a delivery challan. Okay, giving reference to the invoice so that it can be tracked. Copies of the corresponding delivery challan shall accompany each consignment because each consignment should have a document. So I will accompany the consignment note along with the duly certified copy of the invoice, saying that this delivery challan is for this product, but the main product is there together, which is there in the invoice. So you will give a delivery challan and a copy of the invoice. The original copy of the invoice shall be sent along with the last consignment. Okay. So last consignment जो रहेगा उसके साथ आपको invoice जाना चाहिए, not with the first consignment. With the first consignment, second, third consignment, you will attach the copy of the invoice. Okay. Yeah, Harish, you are right. I think GST on advance receive in case of expense is not applicable in case of GST on export refundable. In case of export itself, GST is not chargeable. So even in case of advance receipt, why will you charge? If the supply transaction is liable to GST, then only on advance also you will charge. In your case, exports is zero rated. So when exports is zero rated, then the supply receipt of advance itself is not liable to GST. For warehousing services, delivery challan applicable because it's a transportation of goods other than by way of supply. Correct. In case of warehousing, where you're giving from your main office to a warehousing, it is a good example of a usage of a e-way bill, or usage of a delivery challan. No questions? Okay, so let's proceed further. We understood semi-knockdown and completely knockdown condition, how the movement has to happen. Then there is a special instance when jewelry or artwork is sold on approval or movement. Okay, how is this happen is goods may be moved within the state, from the state of registration within the state, or from one state of registration to another state for supply on approval basis. And artworks may be sent by artists to galleries for exhibition on delivery challan along with e-way bill wherever applicable, right? So where there is some movement of goods where you don't know whether it will supplied where somebody will buy it, like art galleries and all, when they hold, the painters sell their goods, give their goods, saying that if it is selected, they will sell it. Otherwise, it has to come back. So for such cases also, when it is sent for exhibition, for display, they will accompany the goods with the delivery challan and the e-way bill. Everywhere you will see e-way bill wherever there is movement of goods, right? And e-way bill is definitely there. Along with that, you give an invoice if it is a sale. If it is not a sale, give a delivery challan. Now, another instance is where a jeweler person carries personally and invoice is issued at the time of supply. Like he will carry lot of small jewelry things in his bag and he will travel and he will show it to the shopkeeper. If they like it, they will buy it. Otherwise, he will get back the jewelry. So in such case, what do we do? Because when he moves, he will not be able to raise the invoice because it is not sale. It is for showing it to the customers. So when he travels it, he will take a delivery challan and e-way bill and he will carry the invoice book along. Whatever is the invoice raised, he will raise it. On the balance, when he gets back, he will raise another e-way bill saying that this is what is returned, because E-way bill, you will have to track with the invoice. If I have raised 500 quantity of e-way bill, invoice should match with 500 quantities. If it is not there, it means what you have taken it and you have paid GST. So it's a loss to the revenue. So that's why they said that when you raise a invoice, to that extent, don't raise a reverse e-way bill because you have raised e-way bill for the total quantity. And once you're returning for the balance stock, which is unsold, on that raise the e-way bill and close it. Okay. Now, let us understand the concept of, please explain third point. Himlata, which third point? This one, right? Yeah. So copy of the corresponding delivery challan shall accompany each consignment. So each consignment shall carry the corresponding delivery challan for that consignment, and a copy of the invoice should be accompanied along. Now, let us understand the concept of credit note and debit note. When do we issue a credit note and who issues a credit note? Credit note firstly is issued by the supplier. Unlike our accounting terms where credit note, when a receiver gives some kind of reduction, then he can give a credit note. But in GST, no such concept. Debit note and credit note can be issued only by the supplier, and the recipient cannot issue a credit note. Okay. The supplier is the one who will issue a credit note in all instances. When he will issue a credit note, where one or more of the tax invoices has been issued for supply of any goods or services, and if the taxable value in the invoice is higher than the tax value. Okay, where the taxable value in invoice is more. Now I have supplied value of goods worth 1 lakh rupees, but in the invoice I have wrongly mentioned 1,10,000 rupees. Where the value is high, there I will issue a credit note. That is first instance. Second is where the tax charged in the invoice is higher than the tax payable. Value is 1 lakh. Correct value is also 1 lakh. Now, instead of charging 18,000, I've charged 28,000 by mistake. To correct that, I will raise a credit note. Matlab, whatever reduction in the tax or in the value I have to do, for that I will raise a credit note. Whatever invoice I've raised, now I have to correct it by bringing the value down. For that, the supplier will raise a credit note. And where the goods supplied are returned by the recipient. If the goods are returned, then I will raise a credit note. And where goods or services are both supplied are found to be deficient, defective or deficient, in such case, I will raise a credit note. Only in these 4 instances, you can raise a credit note, which means what? If I have raised an invoice and the supplier says I will not pay, that's a bad debt. For bad debt cases, you cannot raise a credit note. Okay. Whenever you give a discount also, you should give it through a credit note, but not for secondary discount, because we know the conditions for discount, that it should be agreed at the time of supply and it should be known against which invoice you are raising. If those conditions are satisfying, that is also instance of first where the taxable values invoice is higher, right? If you're given, you can have 2 opportunities to give a discount. Give it in the invoice itself or give it through a credit note. But secondary discounts, that is discounts which are not known at the time of supply, it's a random discount. For that, credit notes cannot be issued. For that, what can be issued? A commercial credit note can be issued, which we have discussed. Okay. Is it necessary to issue a debit note by the recipient against the credit note? No. Only in accounting, against a credit note, debit note has to come. In GST, you make a supply, you raise a credit note, recipient need not give you a debit note because recipient cannot issue a debit note also. Okay. So in case of reduction in value, I will raise a credit note. For increase in value, I'll raise a debit note. What is this? Debit note means debit note or supplementary invoice. You can call it as a debit note or supplementary invoice, because with the value you have to increase it, wherein if where one or more tax invoices have been issued for supply of any goods or services or both, and if the taxable value in the invoice, the value in the invoice less than the taxable value of such supply. Same example of 1 lakh value of goods. I've mentioned the invoice wrongly 90,000 rupees. So 10,000 I have to get, right? So for that, I will raise a debit note. Or again, the tax charged is to be 18%, I've charged 5%. So for the differential 12%, I will raise a debit note. Or when the quantity received by the recipient is more than the tax invoice issued. I've raised the invoice for 50,000 units. The customer said, you have sent me 55,000 units. So for the 5,000 units, I will raise a debit. Increase in value, debit note; decrease in value, credit note from the supplier only. Both are from the point of view of supplier itself. And the value of debit note and credit notes get uploaded on the GSTR1 and becomes part of the GSTR3B returns. Then, sir, there is a loss to the supplier, GST paid but not recovered, and also explain commercial credit note concept. There is a loss to the supplier. No, there is no loss to the supplier. He charged it. Now he will raise a credit note, and this, to the extent of this taxes on the credit note, receiver will the supplier, the receiver of the services will reverse the input tax credit. Once he reverses the credit, and I will also reduce my taxes. So if there is another sale in this month on which what tax is payable, from that I will reduce the credit note. So there is no loss. That's where the credit note comes into your rescue, saying that from your taxes payable, you have to reduce this credit note. How will the recipient return the goods? Through a delivery challan. This is another case where delivery challan helps in that receiver will return it through a delivery challan. Yes, in case of increase in value, he can issue a new invoice. Yes, either a supplementary invoice or a new invoice or a debit note, all the same. Anything is possible. Okay. What is the time limit within which credit note can be issued? Credit note can be issued within September following the end of the financial year. Now it is, which means it is updated now, which means up to October, you can use a credit note or the date of furnishing of annual return, whichever is earlier. Like how you have a concept of ITC, within what time you can claim the ITC credit, that time limit applies for credit note also. Then time limit for debit note, that's not time limit, because it's a revenue to the government. Whenever you find a mistake, that time you raise it and declare it in the month during which such debit note is issued. Credit note time limit, subsequent years, October return. Here it is mentioned of September. I'll correct this. This is October's month's return, which is till the 30th November. And or the date of furnishing of annual return, whichever is earlier. And for credit note, no time limit, declare in the month during which such debit note is issued. Yes, Rahul, in case of bad debts, GST is a loss because you have considered, correct. But that's where the concept of GST comes in, because you identify your customer. If your customer does not pay you, the government will not suffer the loss. You will have to suffer the loss. How the tax increased by issue of debit note without mention of the amount of tax which is calculated, because tax will be calculated amount. Tax will be calculated amount. In case of debit note, you don't have to mention the value. You should just mention the value as 0 and mention that due to increase in rate of tax, and mention only the tax value. Debit note you can give a debit note without the value also. Good question. And it will be considered in the GST return also. Possible. It is permitted and it's possible that you can issue a debit note without the value being mentioned. व्हाट इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ कमर्शियल क्रेडिट नोट? मतलब आपको डिस्काउंट देना है बट जीएसटी के अंदर आपका परमिटेड नहीं है, दैट इट्स नॉट अ वैलिड डिस्काउंट, क्योंकि आपने पहले अग्री नहीं किया है एट द टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई, लेकिन आपको कस्टमर को बेनिफिट पास करना है, तो आप कमर्शियल क्रेडिट नोट रेज कीजिए, उसमें जीएसटी का इंपैक्ट नहीं आएगा। दैट इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ कमर्शियल क्रेडिट नोट। क्योंकि इनवॉइस के अगेंस्ट आपको अगर डिस्काउंट देना है, देन इट शुड बी डिसाइडेड एट द टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई एंड इट शुड बी लिंक टू द इनवॉइस। लेकिन आपको एक रैंडम डिस्काउंट देना है कस्टमर को, तब आपको कमर्शियल क्रेडिट नोट रेज करना पड़ेगा, जीएसटी का बेनिफिट आपको नहीं मिलेगा। सी इन द नॉर्मल क्रेडिट नोट आपका जीएसटी बेनिफिट मिल रहा है, आप इतना जीएसटी कम पे करोगे, लेकिन कमर्शियल क्रेडिट नोट में आपको बेनिफिट नहीं मिलेगा। Okay? Now, tax collection and mentioning. Section 32 says that there is a prohibition on unauthorized collection of tax, which means that a person who is not a registered person shall not collect in respect of any supply of goods or services or both any amount by way of tax under this act. ठीक है, तो आपको बिना रजिस्ट्रेशन आप टैक्स नहीं कलेक्ट कर सकते हो, आपको रजिस्ट्रेशन लेना ही पड़ेगा अगर आप टैक्स कलेक्ट करते हो। No registered person shall collect tax except in accordance with the provisions of this act. मतलब एक्ट में अगर बोलता है टैक्स कलेक्ट करो तभी आप कलेक्ट कर सकते हो, वरना नहीं। That is the concept of tax collection. Then amount of tax to be indicated in the tax invoice. Whatever tax you are collecting, you have to mention it. Notwithstanding anything contained in this act or the other law for the time being in force, where any supply is made for a consideration, then every person who is liable to pay tax for such supply shall prominently indicate in all documents relating to assessment tax invoice or like documents the amount of tax which shall form part of the price. तो आप अगर टैक्स कलेक्ट करते हो, फर्स्ट आपको रजिस्ट्रेशन होना चाहिए, विदाउट रजिस्ट्रेशन यू कैन नॉट कलेक्ट द टैक्स, और अगर आप कलेक्ट करते हो तो उसको आपको डॉक्यूमेंट पे मेंशन करना चाहिए। Is the e-invoice e-waybill applicable? We'll come to that, Harish. We'll understand the requirements of e-invoice and e-waybill. E-waybill is definitely applicable if there is movement of goods. If there's no movement of goods, e-waybill is not required. E-invoices, we'll get to it now. I have issued an invoice and after I'm giving a discount, then also issue a credit note. Now, if you have an invoice after giving a discount, then the value is already reduced. Then you don't have to give a credit note. If you have not given a discount in the invoice, but later on you want to give it on fulfillment of some conditions, then for that you will raise a credit. Now let's understand the e-invoicing in this manner, because it's all procedural. If you read your material, you will be able to understand. I would request you to read your material and understand this. So then this will be clear. But I'll explain you the brief aspects of e-invoicing. You can read your material as usual in your next session. Yes, Satish, I had mentioned that there's an error in that slide. So it can be issued by 30th November. May slide ko change. I'll explain that in the slide. What you're saying is right, by 30th November itself. Explain credit note and debit note with example. बताया था ना? Okay, I'll repeat it, Harendra. You have made a sales, right? I'll take that example of this slide. Yeah. Now this person, this is the invoice. Now this person raises a tax invoice. On this, the rate is 586 and 568. Now 586 is correct. Instead of 568, I should have actually charged him. Let's take a case of 500. इसमें कितना होना चाहिए? 500. I have charged him 68 rupees extra. When the value is higher than the actual value, I will raise a credit note. So I have to reduce the value now. Can I do correction in this? No, invoice is already been raised, given to the customer. E-invoice, e-waybill, everything is raised. I cannot do the correction. So for this correction of reducing the value for the differential of 68 rupees, I will raise a credit note. I will mention credit note plus this product value 68 and tax on that at 9%, 9%. Okay, 9% of IGST. So it should be 18% IGST. So I will mention that and raise a credit note. So when I give a credit note, the receiver will take the invoice, take the credit note, minus credit note from the invoice and pay the balance. So when I pay this, raise this invoice on 568, fully I've paid 51 rupees, but I should have paid only on 500. So to the extent of 68 credit note, what I'm raising, when I do a total of my invoices for the next month, when I raise a credit note, 5,000 is the value of my normal sales. From that, I will reduce the 68 rupees. So I am reducing this tax and paying the balance. That is the concept of credit note. Understood? Now debit note. That first product, which is 580, this should have been 80. So 100 rupees I have to collect difference from him. For this 100 rupees, I will raise a credit note. Mention this product name, this HSN code, quantity 1. Rate will be 100 and charge GST on that. So I will charge and get the GST from that person. Clear, Harendra? Thank you, Vanessa. If the lectures and study materials are helpful, that's very good. Thank you so much. Okay, so let us go to the concept of e-way bill now. Lavanya, wherever my voice is low, you could tell me. Because of some mic issue, I think this is happening. Whenever it's low, you can please ping me here. Okay. E-way bill, we have a separate chapter. We'll first understand today on the concept of e-invoicing, because e-way bill, we have a separate day itself dedicated. Our next session itself is on e-way bill. Okay. So e-way bill will understand in brief what is an e-invoice. We'll understand the e-invoice first. What is an e-invoice? Is it that your invoice, what you're doing electronically from your computer, that's an e-invoice? Because manually, if you do, that's a tax invoice. If you do on computer, is it e-invoice? Is that the meaning? Or is it an invoice generated by the software is an e-invoice? No. Or invoice generated in central servers invoice? No. E-invoice does not mean generation of invoice from a E-invoice does not mean from a central portal of the tax department. E-invoice means that your invoice, okay, has various things. Now, okay, we'll not go with the slide. We'll go with our understanding. So I will just blank this up. Okay. E-invoice means that simple that I have raised a sales and I have this invoice. Now, because of lot of bill trading which is happening, government said that each of your bill has to get recorded onto the system. So they came with this concept of e-way bill. For movement of goods, that also did not help because lot of bill trading was happening in spite of e-way bill things. Because if you move the goods only e-way bill, without movement of goods, you can still raise a e-way bill. So there is no movement, so nobody will catch it. But the invoices itself were happening in such a way that this e-invoices were getting, this invoices were being used to claim credits unnecessarily. So to stop this, they brought this e-invoice wherein you're raising an invoice. Okay, you raise an invoice. At the time of raising invoice, we'll give a certain time limit. Upload this details on the portal. Once you upload it on the portal, we know that this is a genuine invoice. If it's not a genuine invoice, we'll catch you because your data, your invoice is getting recorded now. So that if the recipient is not the correct recipient, then he will not be called upon. So all your data, you upload it online and we will track that. So this is the concept of e-invoicing, wherein your actual invoice data, you have to give it on the e-invoice portal. Once you give it on the e-invoice portal, you will get a identifiable unique IRN number. This IRN number will help you to put it on your invoice and your e-invoicing is completed. That is the basic concept of e-invoicing. Invoice generated by each software took more or less same. So to bring harmony, they brought this e-invoicing, and reporting also becomes easier because the format of reporting, okay, these are things that the general concept, but the main crux we will get into it. What is the limit for e-invoicing? E-invoicing started with the limit of 500 crores, but from 1st October 22, it is 10 crores. That any person, the limit for year is not the previous year. The important point here is anybody having any turnover of this limit from 17-18. From 17-18 in any year, if you had this limit of 10 crores, then you have to raise a e-invoicing. मतलब मेरा turnover 17-18 में था 15 crores. In 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, 22, 23, 23, 24 also, my turnover is less than 5 crores. Okay. But from October 22 onwards, I will have to raise a e-invoice because in any of the financial year from 17-18, since in 17-18 my turnover was 15 crores, from October 22, I have to raise e-invoicing. Matlab, I will raise an invoice and attach the e-invoicing also in it. Okay. So it's not the previous year. Everywhere in HSN code, we have seen previous year. In this case, it is not previous year. It is in any year from 17-18 onwards. So they brought down the limit, and any person who's having turnover more than 10 crore from October 22, he will have to raise an e-invoice. Now the limit is reduced to 5 crores, but for your exam, the limit is 10 crores because the 5 crores is reduced from August 23. But for our exam, relevant is October 22, 10 crores itself. What all category I have to raise the invoice when I make a B2B supply? If I make B2C supply, I don't have to raise the e-invoice. B2B supplies, B2G supplies, exports, or any supplies through e-commerce operator and reverse charge transactions, I have to raise a e-invoice. Applicability of invoice for invoices, debit notes, credit notes are all required. For delivery challan, bill of supply, job work, not required. Okay, only 3 documents: invoice, debit note, and credit notes. Exemptions for whom e-invoicing is exempted: special economic zones, SEZ units, not developers. SEZ developers are different, SEZ units are different. Only for SEZ units, the exemption is there. Insurance or banking company, GTA, supplier of passenger transport services, person supplying through multiplexes, and government department and local. So e-invoicing is exempted. Then how to process? You will get a system. You have to provide these details. Then a number comes in. That number you have to put all these details on the e-invoicing portal. From the e-invoicing portal, IRN number comes in and it gets fetched. What is the benefit from this data? The GSTR1 also gets auto-populated because this is sales data, and GSTR1 also is sales data. From this data, GSTR1 comes in, and from this data, e-way bill also gets auto-populated. Okay. This is the schema of how it looks, so that somebody were asking, show me the portal. Instead of showing the portal, I could take the screenshot and show it over here, that how it works, so that you know how the e-invoicing works. This is the final number what we get. You get a final IRN number and acknowledgement number. This means that e-invoice has been generated. The structure of the e-invoice has been shared. What are the advantages? No reporting, duplicate reporting, auto reporting, all of that happens. Now, after e-invoicing, there is also a concept of dynamic QR code, which means that when you are making if you're having turnover more than 500 crores, this limit still continues. So that limit of 10 crore was for e-invoice. For dynamic QR code, the limit is 500 crores, which means you're a big company, multinational company, or a big company which are dealing with FMCG products. Now, if your turnover is more than 500 crores in any preceding year, again from 17-18, then you have to put a QR code in your invoice. What is the purpose of this QR code? So that it facilitates digital payments. So everybody now uses Google Pay, right? So to facilitate that, said that when these big companies you're selling anything in your invoice, you have to mention a QR code so that it will facilitate digital payments. Okay, that is more on QR code. I know this last two things were very fast because it is self-explanatory. That's why you can go through the material and we can discuss this. Now it is 5 crore. Yes, now it's 5 crores. If you have made any mistake in e-invoice, then, and if your invoice is correct, okay, then you can't correct the e-invoice because amendment of e-invoice is not possible. But this mistake will get repeated in GSTR1, correct? Because data from your goes into GSTR1. So you can correct it in GSTR1. Okay, before filing, you can check it and correct it. Because if your invoice is wrong, then you'll raise a credit note. If your invoice is correct and only e-invoicing is wrong, then you don't have to change your invoice, correct? You have to make only corrections in the GSTR1 port. But if your invoice itself is wrong and the e-invoice also has gone wrong subsequently, then you have to raise a credit note for that. Can supplier issue the invoice on the same day or later day? No, he has to issue it on the same day. But there is no time limit as such which is specified. It should be generally on the same day. So the government will bring in the timeline for that. As of now, there's no timeline that within what date e-invoice has to be issued. What is the difference between unit, SEZ unit, and developer? SEZ unit is the companies which are there in the SEZ zone. SEZ developer is a developer who's developing the SEZ zone itself. So he is a developer. Okay, so if there's no questions, just take 2 more minutes to see if there are any more questions. Venisa, I think it will not be relevant because in the amendments, it's not come on the 5 crores. If it is there, I'll just check the amendments and I'll update you. In the amendments book, Nagraju, if they have mentioned that this is applicable, then it is there. Just check. Bhavika, limit of e-invoice is saying that, say from October 20, if you're under in any of the previous years, if you had turnover above 10 crores, not only previous year, any of the years from 2017 onwards, that is from the day when GST came in, from that year onwards, in any year, if your turnover is above 10 crores, then you will have to comply with the e-invoice requirements. So if my turnover is 2 crores for so many years, then I don't have to comply with it. But in any of those years, not only 1 year, not only that continuous year or something, in any 1 year also, if it's crossed 10 crores, then you have to comply with the e-invoicing requirements. Okay, have a good weekend. So tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, we don't have class. We will again catch on Monday and discuss on e-way bill. Okay, so we'll continue with this questions on e-invoicing because e-invoicing, e-way bill will all be interconnected. So we will discuss e-way bill and take up your questions on e-invoicing. Request you to please go through the e-invoicing chapter and let me know if there's any questions.